Last year was the first time we had an Essentials for Freedom conference. And for that conference, I said, to me, the absolute essential for freedom is to have the capacity to think. If you can't think, you can't be free. And I was saying, let's call it think or you're sunk or whatever. And Danny said, think or sink. And so I want to thank Danny for the title, Think or Sink. And then, so I went away and I wrote it and I did the speech. And actually, over the next few months, I wrote a book, Think or Sink. And that also made me think a lot about how hard it is to get heard, how hard it is to get that out. Because even before I came to the conference, I really was trying to get that message out. So the two conferences kind of link with each other. What I want to do now is talk about all those ideas as I put them together in Think or Sink, and how I hope that actually they will be put out, these ideas, over the next few years, because I think they're so important. I know they're so important for this generation, the next generation, and the West. So, I have 7 urgent messages. I feel like somebody who's stranded on a desert island, but I don't want to yell like, I'm stranded, help, come and get me. What I feel like saying is, look, you're stranded. Please, come and get me. Let me help you because I can see you're stranded and you think you're not. Please, you'll sink if you don't listen to me. Like, not me, the person, but me with this message. Okay, so I have 7 messages. What are they? First of all, bad thinking exists. So, next, it's dangerous to us individually and to our society. Third, I'm not just claiming bad thinking exists. I can show it, prove it. In other words, I am not asking you to believe me based on, oh yeah, she's got a podium, she says. No, absolutely not. Next, if we come to recognize that these things are bad thinking, we need to make massive changes, because it's not just, oh yeah, now I think this. A different thinking has different consequences. It asks us to do things differently. I read detective novels, or anyway, I used to quite a lot. So the 5th thing I want to convey is who benefits? Who benefits from the bad thinking? Because it's really important not to say just this exists. And I'm going to show that one group gets short-term benefits and another short and long-term. And I think it's really important, because if you get short and long-term benefits, you know what, if I were a detective story writer, I would suspect that those people had something to do with what's going on. I know in detective stories, they always do. The benefits is implicated. Then, what is the core ingredient that is needed for all the changes I'm talking about, and even to speak about it and act? It's not that you can think well, it's that you have guts, that you have courage. Because many people think or sort of think, but they don't have the courage of their conviction. And so I think that courage is important. And finally, I have 3 actions that I think are most needed. 1, we need to confront political correctness. What is political correctness? Somebody has called it a dominant, dictatorial, social control system. Okay, more simply, it means you have rigid perceptions of different groups, rigid perceptions, rigid opinions, and a great name-calling strategy for anyone who disagrees with you. That, as far as my nutshell of political correctness. Okay, so that's number 1. Secondly, it's not just political correctness. The education system needs to be changed. The word propaganda is a really dirty word in the West. We're supposed to hate propaganda, be against propaganda. Propaganda is bad. Well, right now, we have a propaganda system in education. If you don't think that's good, well, that education system had better be changed. And then we need to develop a much stronger media committed to facts and logic, and they'll probably also connect with political change. And what do I want from you? 3 things, like 3 actions, 3 things. Right now, I just would like you to listen to me. If you're here and listening, chances are you care, and I do want you to care. And the third thing is, not just care, because care is the heart. I want people to take action. So let's go through it all. Think or sink. That's my basic premise. Without the capacity to think well, there is no freedom. If you can't think, you're stuck within the blocks in your head. You're as trapped as if you were in a cave. There was a landslide. There's no way out. You're stuck. You're unfree. You might not recognize danger. You might not recognize your friends. You might misunderstand information. You would definitely distort. You might stay with fixed ideas, not let in reality. You might believe you're increasing safety, but you might actually be eroding human rights. There's so many things you do wrong if you cannot think, and I just have a list of them. One of them that jumps to mind is that most Canadians have accepted a Human Rights Commission that did not protect human rights. There's the very famous case of Ezra Levant, who was charged through a Human Rights Commission of doing something hateful, whatever it was, and I don't really care what it was, but it was an unfounded charge because he published a cartoon which in no way violate the Canadian laws. It cost him $100,000, 900 days, and his magazine to defend himself. What did it cost the people who charged him? Absolutely nothing. There were no court costs involved to them. And if Canadians did not respond with massive outrage at this, like millions of people marching, like who marched for the cartoon, what that tells me is that the thinking was utterly crazy. What is going on in people not to be outraged if somebody publishes a little cartoon which is totally legal and somebody loses a huge chunk of his life? And right now, again, how many people are marching, outraged, protesting, giving money to Eric Brazeau, who, yes, chatted about Islam negatively on a public transportation vehicle, but does he deserve 20 months in jail? A lot of rapists get off with less. How could that be possible? But I'm not talking about that. That's the one thing. The thing I'm talking about is that people are not outraged. It's like they don't care, or they think he should have been more careful. I'm going, what's going on? Or maybe they just don't have the guts. They don't have the courage. Next thing, okay. What is good thinking? It's so simple. It's one of the easiest things in the world. There are only two rules. One, get facts. Get lots of facts, and at the same time, even if you have loads and loads of facts, let your mind be open to more facts, because you might be wrong. I saw an inconvenient truth from Al Gore. I thought it was the facts. So I thought I had the facts. Then somebody said, no, you really should see not evil, but wrong. And I was like, ridiculous. But anyway, because I was willing to keep an open mind, I saw not evil, just wrong, also on Al Gore. And I went like, oh my God, it shreds everything. In other words, you have to keep your mind open to more facts. And then there's another thing. You've got to use logic. And the rules of logic are so very simple. It's not a complicated thing to go and have logic. Okay, given that logic is so easy and good thinking is so easy, I told you there was evidence that we have bad thinking. So first of all, what bad thinking is there? Here's a bunch of it. In the West, an entire generation, and it's not just Canada, it's the United States, Europe, Australia, has been brought up to believe all opinions are equal, all cultures and religions are equal. We're all where we are meant to be. Everything happens for a reason. And of course, it's evil to be judgmental. You shouldn't be judgmental. And then there is no right or wrong. Everything is relative, which goes with, that all opinions are equal, and therefore everything is relative. And not only relative means it's my culture, your culture. It's subjective. It's what I feel. All that really counts is what I feel. Okay, so I'm saying these are bad thinking. I said I'd have to show it. By the way, how prevalent is this? I've asked my students if they believe in male-female equality, or if they're anti-slavery, or for gay rights, etc. Why? And they said, well, because it's your opinion. And I've gone, no. People haven't acted for these on the basis of it's their opinion. Yes, it's been their opinion, but that's not. If you'd ask them, why did Harriet Tubman have the Underground Railroad? She wouldn't have said, it's just kind of have a feeling that, slavery is just not my thing. She would have said, I believe it's morally wrong to have slaves. It goes against our inherent human rights for people to stay with their partner, to stay with their children, to have freedom of movement. In other words, she would not have argued in terms of, I just got a feeling and an opinion. When my students, I couldn't get that through to them. And then they also said about slavery, because, they agreed it was an opinion. Then they said, and by the way, they're also every single one of my black students held that the only reason that it might be against slavery is because it's opinion. There's no factual basis. And one said, but it's my opinion too. But unlike you, I know it's just an opinion. This morally superior person and indoctrinated. So what's wrong with holding the opinion that all opinions are equal? One, it's illogical. Okay, anything that contains its opposite has to be wrong. For example, if I'm alive includes I'm dead, it doesn't work. Now, most things don't include their opposite. But the opinion that all opinions are equal means that every single opinion fits in there. Another opinion is all opinions are not equal. So it includes its opposite. Anything that includes its opposite is wrong. And so you can do it just by logic. Then you can do it by facts. If all opinions are equal, what do you mean? An equal number of words, an equal amount of validity, an equal amount of evidence backing it. And you can easily show different opinions have a different amount of validity based on evidence. You can even show that some opinions have absolutely no evidence. The inferiority of some race or another. We don't have any evidence, so all the evidence is over there. And so, you can so easily show it, so you can shred these opinions one after another with both logic and facts. Here's another thing to show that there's something wrong going on with all opinions are equal. The same politically correct students who believe that all opinion, cultures, and religions are equal also believe that the apartheid Israeli state is committing genocide against the people of Gaza, whose population has quadrupled. They are very understanding of Hamas and its charter of driving Israel into the sea and every Israeli into the sea, and they think that's really understandable based on the fact that people of Palestine have keys to homes in Israel. And you can point out to them that many survivors of the Holocaust had keys to homes in Poland, Hungary, etc. But that isn't relevant to them, or that was too long ago or something. So what you can tell on both sides, for some reason it makes sense to them to hold these opinions, and they've also been indoctrinated to hold the opinion that Israel is worse than any other country. How is this possible? Because nothing is actually based on logic, facts, thinking. Everything, it's rote learning, propaganda, internalized stuff. And I want to give you a fact from a really excellent book, Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. What he shows is that people come to their position first, most people, and then they find a reason to back it. All opinions are equal. I've asked my students why. Well, it's just obvious. I've always known that. Well, I sure didn't. Most of the people in my generation didn't know that. So people come to the backing afterwards. In other words, I believe this, therefore I'm going to find ways of justifying it. What's wrong with bad thinking? Some people might actually argue that there are merits to bad thinking. So, okay, all opinions aren't equal. Doesn't it make society go better if we don't judge culture and religion? Won't we get along better with each other? Won't we just avoid conflict? Well, what I'd like to point out, and all of you know, is that the non-German part of the world was an expert at avoiding conflict with Germany 1933 to 1939, when Hitler came to power and stayed in power, and when Chamberlain kept making one nice agreement with Hitler after another, and Hitler kept disregarding them and marched into Czechoslovakia, marched into Poland, marched into Austria, took over. If you don't think well about something, it's incredibly dangerous. Most of us, in fact, know that we'd better think well about something like cancer. Get it early. Don't wait until stage 4 or 5, because chances are it's way more dangerous and it could be game over. Whereas stage 2, it's usually highly curable. So how come we're not supposed to think properly about opinion? It is to somebody's benefit. Well, another thing might be, okay, so it's not so good not to think well, but couldn't we hurt people's feelings if we judge their cultures or religions negatively? Even if there's evidence for it, might we not want to point it out because of hurting? Couldn't we make injury if we point out that, somebody's culture or religion is not so good? Well, first, I don't suggest that we have to teach this in schools. I think it's just fine if teachers just taught thinking and said very clearly, there's some things we will not think about here. We're not going to look at culture just because there's going to be a lot of fuss and, a lot of negativity, and plus I'm not trained for it. I'm going to avoid that. But let's be honest, as opposed to lying and pretending it's equal. To say it's equal is to lie. To say I won't talk about it is a different thing. There are things we may not talk about. For example, sex ed for 3-year-olds. You may not want to give them sex eds, but you don't have to pretend there's no sex. And if they come from where do babies come from, you don't have to give a big sex ed explanation. But you don't have to lie either and say the stork brings babies. So there could be some way of giving some kind of explanation a 3-year-old can understand. And at the same time, not giving too much information. So a teacher might not want to, and we might in fact discourage teachers from talking about religion, saying religion is too hot a topic, talk about it at home. Talk about culture at home. But here what I'll do is I'll give you the tools to think about it. Like go get facts about different cultures and check that the facts are valid. See if there's another way of looking at those things. For example, so much has been put about Islam as a religion of peace. It doesn't go with history. So I think it's important to also teach students, don't accept everything you're told as facts. Go and check on these things. What I do strongly encourage is both teaching thinking and another thing, teaching ethics. In other words, good and bad, right and wrong, and to teach a non-relative, non-subjective. They're all fine. What kind of ethics would I encourage? It's reality-based. In other words, we don't have to argue with the gods. My God says this, my God says that. What do humans need to flourish? There's a lot of evidence out on what do we need to flourish. If you don't let females be educated, how can females flourish? If you don't let a female leave the house, how can she flourish? If you hold some race down and don't let them drink from the same water fountain, sit in the same places on the bus, you're going to stop flourishing. So I think there's tremendous evidence on what we need to flourish. So I don't think it's that tough to do. In fact, I wrote something on that, reality-based ethics, and I think it would be a very good, safe thing to teach children, because it's not teaching children to look at any specific culture and religion, but they can go and use that kind of tool to look at any culture, any religion, any fact. And by the way, I do want to say that while students have been told that all cultures and religions are equal, they are at the same time taught that Western culture is bad. Now, they can't all be equal, and Western culture can be worse, but I've already told you things are illogical. How are they told that Western culture is bad? It makes a lot of sense that they're taught some things, like there has been slavery. There's been a lack of male-female equality, and so on. There have been so many things to change for the better. So I think it's important to do that, but at the same time, no other culture can be spoken of negatively. We can only speak of the negative in our culture. That does not make sense. Students are generally not taught the good in our culture, the human rights, the massive things, even the technology stuff. Yes, we've filthied up a lot of the world. There's plastic islands in the ocean. So there's so much to do. On the other hand, if I look at my own family, My mother has had a quadruple bypass. She's lived for almost 20 years with that since. She would have died 20 years ago. She was within a few days of death when she couldn't get up, she couldn't leave the bed when she had a final heart attack before a quadruple bypass. That's technology. That's amazing. Her grandmother, and my mother was brought up by her grandmother, died in her sleep when my mother was 11. My mother was left without family when she was 11. This woman was a healthy woman with a goiter. That was all she needed to have done. That woman would have lived for another 10, 20 years. In other words, there's so much that is good about our society, including the massive education that's available. If you want to get educated in much of the West, you can through colleges. In Canada, it's almost free. It's not completely free, and I'm so happy to pay. So I think both we should look at other cultures also negatively. For example, I've always heard of the Crusades. I think it's very important. Yes, let's pay attention to the Crusades. But my goodness, until a few years ago, I never heard that there were thousands of battles against the West by Islam and that the Crusades were a response to this. That the Christian leaders were sending missives to Europe, to the Pope, etc. Please help us, save us. They're murdering us. They're taking over. It's conquest. It's slaughter. That's what the Crusades came from. So okay, yes, let's pay attention to the Crusades, but let's not say they were the equivalent of the attacks. A counter-strike is not the same as someone who's invading you. In other words, the Crusaders were not trying to invade past what they had had. And the Islamic conquest, North Africa, Middle East, Turkey, it was all going into Christian countries, not conversion. It's not like there were imams coming and saying, look at this wonderful Quran, we're converting you. No, it was conquest by the sword. We need to be taught that too, then the negatives about other cultures, not to put them down, just like it's not putting our culture down, just reality. Face it. So, in general, valuing good thinking calls for massive changes. I've already mentioned that I saw Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth and then saw Not Evil, Just Wrong. Well, that's a very different attitude to climate change. It doesn't say there's no climate change, but what are the causes? How large is it? How much is it a natural thing? How much is it human-made? If it's not CO2, and it is happening because of us, what are we doing that is doing that? It's asking us to pay attention to these things. Then I saw Gaslands, which is very anti-fracking. And there was, I believe in that movie, I learned later on from Frack Nation, Colombia and Saudi Arabia were involved in funding Gaslands. Does that sort of get your antenna up that they might have had a vested interest? I would think so, personally. But, I'm logical. Then I saw Frack Nation, and it tore apart everything I had seen in Gaslands. And by the way, in terms of how hard it is to get the truth out, I have told everybody I know about Frack Nation, just because, it's not my background. I know so little. It could still be wrong. But I'm going to everybody, you should see this, because if you've seen Gaslands, and most of the people I know had seen it, you should see Frack Nation, just to get more information. And by the way, if the information in Frack Nation is right, it calls for massive changes. It's a very pro-fracking message. Not based on we want fracking because we want to make massive money in oil. No, actually that movie was crowdfunded, so it was really very interesting, and the information is different over and over. Good thinking means look at evidence. As long as I've been aware of Islam, I've also been aware that it's supposed to be a religion of peace. At the same time as millions of Muslims were marching against a little cartoon, and we're not marching against the murder of Muslims by Muslims. So if you value good thinking, which means looking at facts, that means look not at what some Muslims say about Islam, it means look at the Quran, look at the Sirah, life of Muhammad, look at the Hadith, the sayings about Muhammad. It means look at what Muslim countries have in terms of human rights or lack of human rights. It means look at ISIS and see the claims. It claims to be following Islam and Muhammad. Don't rely on somebody who says, oh no, it has nothing to do with Islam. It is go to the Quran, Hadith, and Sirah and see, does it? And in fact, the evidence is yes, it does. And that means we look at things differently if we look at information. It calls for massive changes. Right now in Canada and a lot of the West, there's been massive Muslim immigration. Question, is it safe to have a lot of people come in that if we look at their core ideology, and 85% of the Quran, by the way, is political ideology as opposed to religious, is it safe when people have an ideology of a caliphate with no democracy and with rules that were put down 1400 years ago, like cut off a hand for theft? I mean, is it safe to have that come in? And I'm just saying it brings up questions. What does it do? Does it mean we really have to check what do their religious leader, the imams, teach? For example, in Canada, I know that one of them taught that it's really good, like hanging for gays or something, or stoning gays slowly. Why? So they can repent while dying. And I was going, I have a problem with this. And so I think that a fact-based thing means that we need change. And we're going to have a lot of change. That brings me to not just courage, but persistence. I started paying attention to Islam 2006. When it comes to logic and thinking, it's been all my adult life. It's something I love. I love thinking. I love facts. I'm an incredibly curious person. That's got me to learn so many things because I get a new subject and I go, oh, that's interesting too. Oh, that's interesting too. In terms of persistence, it means, of course, there's so much that people haven't listened to. We need to be persistent. If we're here, persistence is part of who we are. And then the courage is sometimes you get name called. People have lost their jobs. Ezra Levant lost his magazine. It is not an easy thing for most people. I want to thank my parents because my father taught me to argue and to believe in arguing. So, I mean, I think I have less need of building that kind of courage than many people because many people were taught, don't argue, don't make waves, it's bad, be nicety nice. And my father said when I disagreed with him, thank you, you're proving I'm a good father because you dare to argue with me. I think all of you, by the way, should bring up any children or grandchildren you have, that a respectful dispute is a wonderful thing. It's the best thing that you can get. Because with a respectful dispute, you say, okay, let's go to the internet and see where the facts are. Let's see if you're right or I'm wrong. Let's find a book about it. And it's not about one person being right or wrong. It's like finding where the truth is. So when somebody proves me wrong, I go, thank you, because you've stretched me. If I'm right, I haven't learned anything. Because I already knew that, and all I did is I conveyed it to you. But if I am wrong, then I think whenever I'm wrong, I benefit. And I think that that's a really good mindset we should all develop, that, you know, as opposed to it's humiliating, it's stretching. Shouldn't everyone be delighted to take in more information? No. First of all, people feel often humiliated, angry, they have a vested interest. Most people have a very hard time being shown that they are wrong. It really gets all kinds of things up, and we have to see that. And they're the misguided, misinformed. They still often feel bad about it. And then there are the people who know the truth and are standing on the side of untruth. Those people, there's really something going on there. Don't expect to get past those people easily. And that brings me to who benefits from an anti-fact, anti-logic stance. Short term, right now in power throughout the West, in most places, it's the politically correct. So of course, short term, they benefit from having their views validated. Who wouldn't? If you're in elected office, if you are the teachers, if you are in control of the media, of course you benefit because you've got the jobs, you have the elected officials. I'm saying that's a short-term benefit, because they're not standing for truth. And if you don't stand for truth, it cannot be a long-term benefit. The other group that I see standing to gain long-term and gaining short-term is Islam. And why do I say that? Short-term, I think we would have been much more leery of Islam and lots of mosques being built and Islamic religious centers, and especially those funded by Saudi Arabia, the most traditional Orthodox Islamic centers that there are, teaching the very traditional Quran with women's subjection and how to beat your wife and why you're allowed to beat your wife and all that kind of stuff. And if I get any of it wrong, okay, but I know that by and large, and also that Islam is supposed to take over the world. There's supposed to be a worldwide caliphate. Now, that's a short-term benefit of all cultures are equal. We don't look at that because we just say, oh, there's bad in every religion. Well, I don't think that that is the case. I mean, I agree there's bad in every religion, but it's not the same. Like, there's bad in every person. But frankly, I would rather not meet Hitler in a dark alley. And, just because I think there's a lot more bad in him than in most other people. So I think there's a relative amount of bad. In terms of long-term benefit, yes, there's a potential long-term benefit to Islam if it actually wins. I don't think it will, but I think that that's the only group that could have a long-term benefit. We people who like freedom of thought and speech, equality across human beings, etc., we do not benefit, not short-term and not long-term. So, what do we need to move from anti-logic, anti-fact? I said 3 things. 1, we really need to confront political correctness. It is just rotten to the core. Not that the people are all rotten, but there's been awful stuff done in the name of goodness. And the road to hell, is paved with good intentions. And I don't see the politically correct as evil. I've heard it said they are. I don't see that. But I see that their things are rigidly bent in many of them. And in terms of rigidity inside people, and people sometimes being nice and holding wrong opinions, I think of my lovely grandmother, my father's mother, who kidnapped me when I was less than a year old from daycare. Because when I was 6 months old, my mother went back to work and I went to daycare. She took a train 50 kilometers to Vienna from her little village, went to the daycare and kidnapped me. Why? To take me to a priest, to have me baptized, so I wouldn't go to hell in case I died. Now, this is a real mental rigidity, but it was done out of love for me, out of love for her grandchild, as opposed to hatred. And I knew my grandmother after that, very caring person, very mentally rigid in many ways too. So I don't hold that all the politically correct are evil people, but I do think that there is something much more angrily misguided, in fact, than my grandmother. My grandmother was not an angry person. But we need to confront the politically correct. Secondly, we've got to change the education system. It's just horrible to let this be done to kids from pre-K through high school or whenever they drop out and on through university. First of all, if you're supposed to teach kids right to begin with, and right now it is not happening. I got them in my college classes. My whatever, God or whatever, some of you don't like the my God thing, but whatever it was a much harder task reaching these people than if somebody, I wouldn't have had to reach them if somebody had only taught them elementary rules of logic and thinking. We have to change the education system for our own protection. And here I want to say I think teachers can become our powerful allies. Most of the teachers I've known have actually been very good, caring people. It's not that they've said, I want to twist my students' brains, I want to warp their mind and damage them until they're crippled beyond belief. They've actually cared. Somebody has twisted their brains. They're not teaching the students something they don't believe. Someone did this to them. So I think a really important thing might be, in some way or other, getting to teachers, talking to teachers group, parents reaching teachers, going to parent-teacher meetings. It's somehow or other getting through to teachers. And I say this from my own teaching experience and having had good intentions and seeing that most people do not act out of bad intentions. Third, we need a media committed to facts and logic, and we sure don't have it by and large. Another huge undertaking, we might need political parties, etc. In general, I'd say we need to move the West towards a pro-fact and pro-logic position, and that's where I stand on Think or Sink. And I want us to think, obviously. Thank you.